Okay, so let's start with June 2020. Variant is 2, paper 2. So let's start with the data response for a change. Okay, normally we do essays first, but let's start with data response. So it says Argentina raises interest rates to 40%. So Argentina is increasing its interest rates, right? And you can, they gave you this Argentina's exchange rate here, which is showing us that peso to dollar was 15. So 15 peso is equal to $1, and it has become to 20 peso is equal to $1. So from 15 P is equal to $1, it's going to become 20p is equal to $1, right? So in this case, guys, you can see this, the exchange rate is such that the dollar is becoming stronger or peso is becoming weaker. So that's first thing we can notice. Ryan, start with, revision wise, micro first, finish all the 3 chapters of micro, demand, supply, elasticity and all, and then move on to macro. Okay, on 4th May, Argentina's central bank raised the interest rate to 40%. The day before this increase, they were raised from 30 to 33%. So Argentina is continuously raising its interest rates. A week earlier, they were raised from 27.25%. The rises were aimed at supporting Argentina's currency, the peso. So they are increasing interest rate, guys. This is interesting. They increase interest rate. We know this. Hot money flows in, right? And that makes exchange rate to go up. So that's what they're doing. They want to make the exchange rate go up. And that is why they're increasing interest rate to make the exchange rate go up, right? So they were raised from 27.25%. These rises were aimed at supporting Argentina's currency, the peso, which lost a quarter of its value over the previous year. So peso is losing its value. Despite these rises, the peso, which before the economic turmoil in Argentina in 2021 to 2001 to 2002 was fixed at parity, was trading at about 22 peso to dollar. Risk to the peso had been developing for some time. These including large budget and current account deficits. So let me underline this. There is budget and current account deficits taking place, having the debt by the government, persistent high inflation, and an overvalued currency. All of these are happening, which are basically causing pressure on peso. Sorry, Vasif, you wrote something about. I don't think that's a good idea, Vasif, because I think we need to now mix things up rather than doing one chapter and doing a lot of those questions, because that also become a little more boring sometimes because we're doing one topic only. I think mixing it up will help right now. And it also helps you in preparing for your exams because, you know, these are the recent questions that are tested. Inflation, a long-standing problem in Argentina, was 25% in 2017, the highest annual rate in South America except for Venezuela. So inflation was also very high. The central bank has set an annual target of 15% and has stated it will continue to take measures to achieve it. Argentina's new president is pursuing a pro-market economic reform program. He's trying to be pro-market, which means lower government intervention, seeking to reverse the protectionism and high government spending of previous governments. The president has pledged to reduce government spending drastically. The political opposition wants to stop him from removing subsidies on a range. So he wants to remove the subsidies on a range of basic household products, including gas and electricity. Removing these subsidies may bring up more inflation in the short term, but it could help bring it down from current high levels to about 5% by 2020. So he's kind of doing what we call supply side policy, and he's trying to reduce inflation through removing subsidies so that there is more decision making or more pricing through market forces of demand supply. International and domestic investors still believe the president has a good plan for Argentina's economic recovery, but they are not convinced he has enough political support to achieve it. So the Argentinian government, in a way, is trying to move away from the pro-government approach to pro-market approach, where they're trying to sort of make sure that the people end up, the economy end up using market forces of demand and supply as a way to go forward. Okay, state. The possibility of shock, is saying, is it a possibility of it coming from micro? And the answer is there is a possibility, but the possibility normally is bleak. Okay. Okay. State what the upward trend shown in figure 1.1 means has happened to the value of peso. So guys, we wrote here the value of peso has depreciated, or dollar has appreciated, or peso has depreciated. So what happened to the value? You'll say peso depreciated. Yeah, peso has become weaker. The Central Bank of Argentina sold US dollars from its foreign exchange reserves to a value of US 1.5 billion on one day in May 2018. With the help of a supply and demand diagram, explain what the effect you would expect this intervention to have on the value of Argentine peso. Guys, so Argentina is doing what? They're selling US dollar from its reserves. So if you remember from our exchange rate chapter, this is what it will look like. So let's make demand supply first. Right? And the exchange rate is E naught, quantity is Q naught. And let's write here peso per dollar. Okay, we express in peso in terms of dollar. Okay, so you will get marks for the clear representation of the graph. Now, what happens is this, that the government is selling its currency, right? Government is selling dollars. When you sell dollar in the foreign exchange market, what happens is this: the dollar will go into the market and you will reduce the supply of your currency. Make sense? So the two ways to look at it: when the dollars go out of the market, so dollars will be sold and peso will be bought. Now, sometimes in your exams, you can also say this: if peso is bought, then the demand for peso is going up. But the way we've shown this is that supply of peso in the market goes down, right? Because the government takes peso out from the market, causing the exchange rate to go up. Yeah, so you are going to see appreciation of peso and supply of peso will fall, causing exchange rate to go up. Got it? Does that make sense, guys? Are we good? Now, the next thing is saying in the extract, it is stated that the risks to the peso have been developing for some time, and that large budget and current account deficits are some of the risk, right? So what is a budget deficit? What is a current account deficit? So they're saying distinguish between budget deficit and current account deficit. The current account deficit is basically when your current account, which contains your net exports, right? So what is current account made up of? Your net exports plus your what you call it, transfers, right? Income transfers. I'm sorry, current transfers and your income. And if it's a deficit, then there is outflow is greater than the inflow, causing the current account to be in a deficit, right? So that's one thing. Budget deficit, on the other hand, when T minus G, the tax revenue minus government expenditure, is less than zero. That's your budget deficit. When the government expenditure is more than the government revenue, so that's your budget deficit. Got it? The extract also states that the persistent high inflation represents a risk to the peso. Explain one way in which a persistent high. So what's the relationship between inflation and exchange rate? So we can talk about this. If price goes up, exports become expensive, imports become cheaper, and that will cause X minus M to go down. And when X minus M goes down, the way it's going to be shown in the diagram will be, if this is my demand and supply of the currency, demand will fall, supply will rise, and the exchange rate will fall from E0 to E1. Got it, guys? Does that make sense? So there will be a fall in your exchange rate because of high inflation. This is a very good data response. A lot of the concepts that we learn in the exchange rate chapter is kind of being revised in this one. Guys, do you all agree with me? Does that make sense? People who are super quiet, listening. Are we good? Wasif, Ryan, Ahmed, Rafi. Awesome, Yusra. Great. So, guys, you can talk about how exports become expensive, imports become cheaper, expenditure will fall, and exchange rate will fall. Okay, then D part, using aggregate demand and aggregate supply curve and analysis to explain how the recent interest rate might help Argentina to reduce its rate of inflation. So this is basically use and explain how interest rates. So guys, we talk about how, this is straight from the notes also, when the interest rate goes up, hot money flows in. And that will cause, your demand to, I'm sorry, what is the question saying? Okay, sorry, this is about inflation. I'm so sorry, guys. I was linking it with exchange rate, but let me clean this up. So when the interest rate goes up, guys, how does it affect inflation is what the question is. When the interest rate goes up, number one thing that happens is that cost of borrowing goes up. This is, May, June to 2020, variant is 2. Cost of borrowing goes up. Also, incentive to save goes up. So as a result of that, two things will happen. Number one, consumption will fall, investment will fall, and therefore your AD will fall. And when AD falls, we can make a diagram here as well. The price level goes down, and so there will be lower inflation. Also, when the interest rates are going up, guys, are we happy with this one? Yeah. So the first thing is this, that inflation can cause demand pull inflation. Interest rate can cause a fall in the demand pull inflation, right? The second thing we talk about is this, that when the interest rate goes up, there could also be a possibility that your cost of production can change, right? So, but first thing first, I just want to know, they want to see, because this is ADAS analysis, it's always good to draw the diagram. So let's draw the diagram, guys. So AD curve will shift backward, causing our price level to go down. Yeah, guys, do you agree? So Ibrahim is saying money supply. What about money supply, Ibrahim? This is kind of like a related point, Ibrahim, in a way, because when what happens is this, when your money supply goes down, interest rate goes up. And if your curve is, like if your equation is that MV equals to PT, right? Whenever money supply goes down, the price level will go down. That is the kind of thing, because when the money supply goes down, interest rate goes up, which causes AD to fall and therefore price level to fall. So the MV equals to PT equation is kind of saying the same thing. Make sense? Guys, is there a link between interest rate and cost push inflation? Anyone? Interest rate and cost push inflation? Hamza, what's the link? So what about interest rate going up and inflation going down? Yeah, AD does shift back, so that's demand pull. But what about cost push? So guys, remember cost push inflation will happen because of a higher cost, right? So whenever cost push inflation happens, and let's say if you decide to increase interest rates, Madhya, you were saying, so I'm asking you guys that we know that the cost of demand pull inflation can be controlled through rising interest rates. Is there a way we can control cost push inflation through rising interest rates? One way I can think about is this, guys, that when the interest rates go up, right, then your hot money flows in, right? When hot money flows in, then the exchange rate will go up. A higher exchange rate would mean exports become expensive, imports become cheaper, right? If imports become cheaper and key inputs are imported, right, then we could have a lower cost push inflation. Do you guys get that? Does that make sense? So we can even cause our cost push inflation to be controlled through rising interest rates. Yes, Hamza, exactly. Do you guys get my explanation, guys? You get this explanation of what I did here? Other than Hamza, is everyone sorted? So here, what you're doing is this, that you are basically making the aggregate supply curve shift to the right by making the exchange rate appreciate and therefore causing the key input to become cheaper. Right? Make sense? So that's an answer for this one. Okay, and this is the question which is for 6 marks. You need to give an evaluation also. So using ADS, how the recent interest rate, you can say this, that, as a conclusion, you can say this, that interest rate rise will be able to control inflation. Yes, Madia, you can ask me questions.
Sir, I had to ask that
Anyone can unmute and ask.
अगर हमारा
Simran, what do you
AD
mean?
is small.
She can of course do that. I need to increase the volume. Yes, yes, please ask me the questions, guys. Whatever questions you have, please ask me.
Sir, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, I was speaking actually before. I think you could not hear me then. Okay, so I had a question. Okay, if our rate of interest is increasing and consumption will fall, so our AD will shift backwards, right? So can we write this in a way that AD is shifting backwards and हमारी inflation कम हो रही है? Because of this reason, our हमारे जो exports है वो we're having more exports, and इसकी वजह से हमारा जो balance of trade है that's improving, and because of that we are having cheaper imports, and इस वजह से हमारी cost push inflation कम हो रही है. Because I think I've attempted this and I've written it in a different way.
I think that's a bit longer of explanation, because when your AD goes down, the economy actually falls into a recession. Remember, this is expenditure dampening policy, right? So it makes my AD fall. There could be a possibility, you can write in your conclusion, guys, there's a possibility that you might see inflation to worsen, because when you make interest rate go up, the cost of borrowing can go up, and that could make the inflation go up, because firms are now going to find it expensive, and the cost of production may go up. But these two reasons are making your inflation to be controlled. So Madia, the way you talk about is that interest rate goes up, the exchange rate goes up primarily because hot money is flowing in, and that can cause this kind of a thing to happen. Make sense? So your explanation is kind of like a very long-term kind of a way to go about it. Makes sense? Are we good? Okay. Guys, the conclusion is basically, is there a way interest rate can worsen inflation? And the answer is yes, because when the interest rates go up, the cost of production can go up because it becomes expensive to borrow, and that can cause your AS to also fall or shift back, and therefore price level to go up. So there could be this possibility that can also happen. So that could be a conclusion. Okay, guys, discuss whether the potential, let's just look at this question. Discuss whether the potential advantages outweigh the disadvantages to the Argentine economy if the president is successful in reversing protectionism. So this is basically another macro question about pros and cons of protectionism. What are the advantages of reversing protectionism? What are the advantages of reversing protectionism, which means advantages will be international trade. So there could be lower prices, there could be variety, there could be competition, there could be competitive advantage exploited, right? More choice, and so on and so forth. And the cons are basically when you remove protectionism, oh, by the way, there could be unemployment that can happen. There could be, like sunset industry argument, which is basically unemployment. There could be infant industry argument. Exactly, Mohammed Bilal. We also talked about dumping. You can say dump or talk about dumping here.
So to prevent monopoly power, foreign monopoly power.
yeah, monopoly, which is trying to exploit consumers. Yeah, dumping, predatory pricing, and all that. Yeah. So this is a very easy question, I think, where you can write a lot of these things, and you can then give a conclusion here that, you know, like there are both advantages and disadvantages of reversing protectionism for Argentina. So you can talk about that. Vasif, goods and services that have little dynamic potential, such as primaries or low-income elastic goods or services. What do you mean by this, Vasif? Yes, so Shaukat, we need to give advantages and disadvantages of both. No, Aga, that's not possible. Why? What happened to you, Aga? Why do you want to have it in person and at old time? Guys, okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to move to my essay questions, right? And as usual, what we do is normally do an essay question from one of the essay questions, and then the other two we'll do tomorrow. So I'm going to start with the more trickier one. I want to do 4. Okay. 3. Should we do 3? Okay, we can do 3. Let me read Vasif's comment. Vasif saying if there's a primary protection of export goods of primary such as food stuff and raw materials, so the country focuses on I know what you're saying. So basically you say firms move away from one to the other. Makes sense. If you are you talking more about how you want to sort of protect the industry that they're going in? So yeah, you can have a reason given here, but in this kind of a question, you can talk about, rather than giving a situational analysis, passive, and it's a good point that you're raising. Try to make it more generic in your discussion. You can give examples, but typically we're trying to protect our goods, or we are in an infant industry where there is a potential competitive advantage. Maybe that's an argument you're making here. So I completely agree with you on that. Okay, guys, can we end on this note? I think today, let's just do this, and then tomorrow we can come back and do the 3 essays. Yeah. I'm feeling pretty hot, and somehow my AC is like kind of not doing too well. So tomorrow we'll do the rest of these questions, and we'll take it from here. Okay. Bye bye, guys. Thank you very much. Have a good